All right, Lisel, I'm German. It's 11 o'clock. I will hand it over to you. I will stay on. But it's has been a wonderful ride, and I'm just so glad to have yet one more hour.
Yeah, you've made it around to 23 hours now of the clock and one more to go. So it's just, it's been such a wonderful group of topics. I'm really excited to go back and see some of those ones that I wasn't able to catch earlier. But I want to extend a welcome to our speakers today. We have a great panel, and I think this is a great session to come on the heels of the one that that you just wrapped up, Katy, about podcasting. Since we're talking about engaging public audiences, and in that podcasting session, they were talking about panelists. We're talking about how the differences in communication formats were important and how different types of communication styles can really be important in getting one's message across. So I think this is a great next session to follow right after that. In this final session today, we're going to focus on disseminating ideas to a broader audience, engaging public audiences. As all of you know, working with public audiences is a partnership between the expert and the audience that involves presenting complex information in many different ways. It involves infusing this complex information with a good dose of fun and engaging people and sharing ideas in a way that's attractive. It involves setting the stage, creating an atmosphere, encouraging curiosity, and presenting your material in multiple different ways so that it will land at least hopefully one of those ways with your audience. So today we have a great panel with lots of experience in this area. Without further ado, I'd like to start by introducing our first speaker. So if we can go to the next slide here. As for those of you who've been with the 24-hour event through today, you already have seen Katy Börner, but just to introduce her for those of you who may have joined recently, in many ways, the Places and Spaces exhibit is Katy Börner's brainchild. She has nurtured the project for 20 years, and she's really the connective tissue that holds it together. She's linked ideas and people and visualizations together in a myriad of different combinations, sparking collaborations that are really more than the sum of their parts. So it's wonderful to have her as part of this session. She is a distinguished professor of engineering and information science at the Leddy School of Informatics, Computing and Engineering here at Indiana University. And she is also the founding director of CNS, the Cyber Infrastructure for Network Science Center. And she co-directs the CFAR Macmillan Multi-Scale Human Program. So this is just a selection of the things that she does, but we are excited to have her today. So Katy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisel. So on the next slide, you will see a cat because I like cats. I have many cats in my life. My daughters each have a cat. Their friends have cats, and every single cat actually has a different personality. And they get excited. And here you see an excited cat because it takes that kind of excitement to do something different. So just understanding is simply not good enough. We have been creating tools for many around the globe to render their own data, be it personal data or professional data, into actionable information so that they can act on it in their own lives. But it's just not good enough to just understand. It doesn't make the mark. It's good, but it's not good enough. So we have been trying to find ways to get people excited, and the exhibit has been magical this way because we have the liberty to get people excited there. In a normal scholarly publication, I'm supposed to present facts, and I'm not sure how exciting that always is for those which read the papers. But ultimately, and this is really a collaboration here with ChatGPT and what the text you see, it's very clear to us and ChatGPT that humans need emotional engagement to change behavior. Just understanding that you should eat well and do your daily sport, it just isn't good enough. The emotional brain oftentimes decides first if you meet somebody new, if you see a new project or hear a podcast. It will be an emotional response first. And then oftentimes the rational brain justifies after why you would now listen to more podcasts or get even more excited or really change your behavior. So this is what we are as human beings, and still we need to change dramatically in order to survive as a species. We had many presentations over the last 23 hours arguing that we really must change our behavior, and it changes hard. It's interesting for me also how much typically we have emotions like fear that then trigger urgency. And that's not always a good thing, because there's a lot of misinformation in our lives, thanks to social media, thanks to kind of misguided news articles. And that triggers urgency and potentially takes away energy that we could spend in a more productive way somewhere else. We do feel joy when we make progress, when we have a great result that we were hoping for, or when we just are healthy. But oftentimes fear is a stronger emotion because it's more life-saving, right? Just being happy about being healthy today is not so urgent, but having some fear about something that could be life-saving is really critically important for our human bodies, and therefore has much higher priority. And of course, we also have much empathy, and that drives pro-social behavior. So if we are among smokers, we might also start to smoke. If we are among people that eat very healthy, vegan, for instance, and we might also eat more vegan food, maybe not exclusively so. But we are very empathic human beings. And so we have to make sure that we are in environments that are good for us, because if we are in environments which make us be empathic with bad behavior, that will be hard to not take on ourselves. So it's interesting for me that, again, we need to change behavior drastically, but that oftentimes also means that we change our self-concept, our habits, and also social belonging. So our social networks will change based on what kind of good or positive or bad or negative energy we bring with us towards certain tasks and ambitions and goals. But ultimately, we need to realize that emotion does trigger transformation. So we need to get to the emotion, even though science typically is not supposed to go there. So on the next slide, you see things that we can oftentimes do as scientists. We can support sensory memory and motor memory. So we are surrounded by very digital objects almost all day long. It's nice to have a furry cover of a phone. There are many new ways of engaging our sensory motor insights by having all kinds of surfaces and all kinds of kind of interactions with these surfaces. And of course, motor memory is important. We know about memory palaces, where you mentally or physically go through an environment to kind of help you remember a lot of facts. And that's super efficient and really memorizing large amounts of information. And we have all these capabilities, and we oftentimes don't use it much, but I think we can totally use it better. And Hans Rosling, who many of you might know from giving the most amazing data visualization talks, he very physically and vividly and practically used, for instance, these container boxes here to just show how many billions of people exist, how many live in dire poverty, and how many live in maybe too much luxury, eating also too much, and sitting too much as opposed to walking more. And it was incredibly effective. And I think we all can learn from him and from many others that do the right thing to help us understand how we can bring in more touch, more motor memory, more sensory memory into communicating science, communicating data, and ultimately also helping people make better decisions. On the next slide, you have collaboration. And again, this is a slide that is in collaboration with ChatGPT. And I was really impressed to see the 40-item lists that ChatGPT created. And then I edited it down and changed text quite a bit. But this is really a combined effort between what AI and large language models now know about human behavior and what we ourselves know about ourselves. And ultimately, I believe we are not smart enough to map ourselves, to map life. We really need tools. And one of the many tools we will be able to use is AI. And so here you see major items. We need multiple forms of intelligence to solve problems. If we just have one lens on it, one view of it, we might oversee other really important developments. Innovation accelerates when multiple intelligences co-create. That's not only true for having male and female faculty members in an engineering department, which also brings diversity, and of course also having ethnic and age diversity in a department is good. But it also is true when we look at the beautiful movie screening we just had of Anna Maria Thales's the Kingdom of Fungi movie. It was just beautiful to see how much we depend on our environment and how little we understand about it. And then, of course, ultimately, there is the larger ecological intelligence that we live in. We are embedded. We are part of an integral part of nature. And of course, ultimately, we need cultural and social intelligence to maintain our cohesion. And it was very obvious during COVID how much I, and I think many others, missed seeing culture and theater and other cultural encounters, and of course, how much we missed seeing each other. And last but not least, also intelligence diversity mirrors nature's strategy. So life here on Earth thrived for billions of years because of ecosystems and because of our interdependence on each other, on all the different types of intelligence. And I can't wait to have better data visualizations of such rich data, which is now available, which we have seen over the last 23 hours, but also to bring together some of the masterminds also here on the panel that have started to analyze and visualize that data and really give us new actionable knowledge and also hopefully emotionally loaded knowledge so that we act on it. And I think that's all I wanted to say right now, but I'm happy to answer questions later.
Thank you, Katy. Rishi, if you want to go to the next slide, I will introduce our next speaker, who is Kim Albrecht, who is he conducts research at the intersection of data visualization, technology, and culture. So follows right on after what Katy was saying there. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in Graphic Design, a Master of Arts in Interface Design, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Media Theory. He is a principal at metaLAB at Harvard and Berlin, a faculty associate at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, and a professor of information design at Folkwang University of the Arts in Essen, Germany. He's known for his exploration of the aesthetic properties of data, and his work spans teaching, research, and application. Additionally, he's a multi-time contributor to the exhibit. One of his works is in this current iteration, Envisioning Intelligences, the first phase. So I invite you to explore that in more depth. And he's also got previous work in the exhibit, both Science Path and the Cosmic, I can't remember the title of it, the Cosmic one also,
Cosmic
right?
Web. Yeah.
Cosmic Web, right. And have I missed any? Are there others as well? I was trying to scan through and see. I know you've been involved in lots of different projects that that we've been aware of over the years. So it's a great honor to have you here. I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, Lisel, thank you so much. And wonderful to hear Katy's thoughts on this. And hi, Stephen. Wonderful seeing you. I have quite a lot of slides. I'm not sure how to control them. I think I just say next slide and then things will move on.
Yep.
So I hope this will work nicely. So recently, I published a book on the epistemological value of design in the context of computational systems. And the question that I was really asking in this book, which is like a media theoretical, philosophical publication, is, okay, if if data visualizations create insights, where's this coming from? I mean, it's very far apart from a design process where you normally design is about creating things. And insights are usually things that are in the world. So how is the creation and how are insights actually related to one another? But I won't dive into the full theory here. But I want to share like one story that might be interesting in this context. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah. So one thing that I did within the book, in a chapter called Chain, is that I made a collection of about 27 data visualization process diagrams. I think one of them is even from Katy. So a lot of people have drawn out this kind of how design functions and what are all the steps that are included within that. And here's a collection of them. We can move on to the next slide. And I think the promise of data visualization boils down to an idea that looks something like this. So we capture the world in data, and then we take that data and we visualize it. And from that visualization, we gain insight into the world. And the results of this processes are oftentimes fantastic. So here are just a couple of examples from my own work. We can move on. Next slide. Yeah. So this is a visualization of movie references throughout the 21st century. So we've got the 1900 at the bottom and 2000 at the top. And what you see is that each shot is a movie, and we see the references that are placed in between the movies. So if one film adapts a certain style or a scene from another movie, this is actually within that data. And in media theory, this is known as the postmodern cinema. So suddenly we can see something that theoretically we have known, but that was never actually placed into an image. And suddenly, with the help of data visualization, we're capable of doing this. Next slide. What you see here is a network of an ecosystem. It's a coral reef, and we see on the top, we see the network, and then below, we see like a temporal emergence of what happens if certain species die out within the ecosystem, and when the ecosystem actually collapses. So we have this like temporal visualization. Next slide. This is a graph that became pretty famous and popular. I published this when Donald Trump first became president in the United States. And what you see here is a network of all the companies and all the people who he's involved in. So all the companies and all the individuals that are connected to that. And suddenly we had an image of what really made his presidency in the beginning problematic, as he's involved in so many things. And to me, it was fascinating doing this work because suddenly I had this image, and throughout the next 4 years, more and more names from this map popped up in the news and became big stories or became part of his cabinet. So the visualization for myself even became like some form of prophecy. Next slide. Yeah, and this is it's a big undertaking that I've done with the research team from the Barabasi lab, where my colleagues basically downloaded all 32 million .gov websites, so all the government websites from the USA, to understand what the US government is actually doing for its citizens. And then we clustered that data and came up with this visualization where we can actually see what kinds of functions does the government provide for its citizens. And we never had such a view and such a perspective on the government. Next slide. And this is a project that Lisel just introduced, which is called the Cosmic Web. So each point is a galaxy. So these are the largest structures of the universe. So basically, it's like a representation of galaxies and how they are connected to one another by force. So it's the notion of visualization is a really powerful one. And throughout the last couple of years, I have really engaged, or throughout the last decade, I've really engaged in this kind of making this visible. But there's a caveat. We can move on to the next slide. That data visualizations are never neutral. It's basically we need a designer, we need a whole team for most of these graphics. We need reporters, we need people who know how to deal with data, and we need a whole network. And at each step, somebody needs to decide what to show and what to hide, and what we highlight and how we visualize it. So visualizations are always made, they're created, crafted, and designs with specific ideas, concepts, and ideologies in mind. And this is something that I have very much experienced by making all of these graphics and publishing them. We can move to the next slide. So something that happened when I made the cosmic web visualizations and made them available on the web, I got all these comments from people. So this is something that was underneath a Wired article where somebody wrote, "Perhaps the universe can be thought of as God's brain." And we can move to the next slide. Yeah, and other people made it or put it more simply and said, "We live in brain." And even other people on the next slide had a more artistic approach by saying, God apparently thinks he's Jackson Pollock. So suddenly, by making these scientific ideas that were basically developed in the lab, by making them public, people came in and had like their own ideas on these visualizations and came up with different kind of ideas of how to interpret them. We can move to the next slide. So it's not just about the data, the visualization, but also the ideas, the culture, the beliefs of the people interacting with these visualizations. The scientist has very specific views and very operative ideas on how to figure out how to improve their model through these visualizations. But the internet had very different ideas. And to me, this is a pretty interesting point because the universe does not look like a brain at all. I made it look that way. So as the creators of this graphics, we actually have a very powerful role in shaping the ideas and concepts of the reality that we live in. Next slide. And there's something fascinating happening in this space. On the one side, we often naturalize the machine from data centers as clouds or statistical models that can think in AI. And simultaneously, we often mechanize the human from imaginations of the human in the 17th century and 18th century as steam engines. So steam was the new technology, and suddenly everybody thought the human mind and the human body was working like steam, to these kinds of depiction from Fritz Kahn, where he visualized the human body as an industrial system in the 19th and 20th century. Next slide, please. And there's something interesting. I think art and design have this power as being interfaces between the cultural layer of how we imagine and how we depict things, and on the other side, the kind of computational layer. And we always have to make certain metaphors and neglect others. Next slide. So from this perspective that I just introduced, the notion of visualization, that visualization can represent insights, is more complicated, and it becomes more difficult to hold truth. So over the last, I would say, 6, 7, 8 years, I investigated this kind of things differently, and I will just show you 3 projects that are basically in video form, so I hope they work. Can we go to the next slide? What you normally see here is a visualization of the Me Too movement. So the first visualization was supposed to be a visualization of the Me Too movement. And there, what we did is we visualized the things that are lost, the unobserved, the forgotten. So we visualized basically tweets from hashtag Me Too that got 0 likes, 0 retweets, 0 comments. So the things that are basically neglected by the Twitter algorithm. What you see here is basically the very first state of a visualization in which we don't visualize, or which I don't visualize the network itself, but its past traces. So what becomes visible is this kind of how the network algorithm is working through space. So, and this is my final visualization, which is something pretty recent. It's called artificial worldviews. And it's a mapping with algorithmic conversations with ChatGPT about what knowledge is. And machine learning is often referred to as this black box, but we can access that black box pretty well by talking to it. Individual inquiries can often only lead to anecdotes, but this kind of structured inquiries in large quantities in the structured data form can lead us to new ideas, what these systems actually produce. And that brings me back to my original chart. Next slide, please. So from this idea of having a world out there, turning it into data, visualization, and insight, I'm introducing on the next slide this idea of looking at the mediations that are basically happening in between. So form and space are pretty interesting terms in that sense, and introduce a more media reflexive notion in which these transformations, in which I'm trying to make visible the transformations that we're applying, the kinds of things that we are embedding from the world into data and from data into visualization. And that leads to a shift on the next slide from world to systems. So we always only have a certain perspective that we work through. There's always a system, and data always needs to be systematized in some way. So we will never capture actual reality, but it's always a systematic approach that we use. And to me, this feels much more humble of what visualization can do, but also gives us much more freedom in how we can investigate, and it leaves new kinds of possibilities. And then we go to the last slide. And for me, then from looking at systems and visualizing the data from these systems, I think there's also a shift away from visualizing insights and more making power structures visible. Who creates the data, who makes data visible. By observing systems, it lets us investigate who constructs power, and making visible what is drawn inside by whom. And with that, I thank you very much, and I'll share the links to the different projects in the chat, which is much better anyways than looking at the videos. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. We'll switch here to Stephen Uzzo, who, Stephen, I'm going to let you share your slides as we discussed, but if you run into anything, Rishi's got them as well and can share them for you if you'd like.
Sure.
Stephen Uzzo has worked throughout his career in places where science and education overlap and coexist, especially where complex systems and networks are involved. He is currently the president and executive director for the Cape Cod Museum of Natural Science or Natural History, and is a co-founder of the Woods Hole Institute. He develops and leads large-scale design and research initiatives to study and integrate new science into teaching and learning, building communities of practice at the intersection of socio-environmental systems, complexity, data science, and engineering. Dr. Uzzo is also active in science and education policy. So I'm going to let you take it away.
Great. Thank you, Lisel. Let me bring up my slides here. Well, thanks, Lisel. Thanks, Katy, and you must be pretty tired by now. But so what I really want to talk about is some of the challenges and opportunities to bring some of these important yet abstract aspects of natural sciences to broader audiences. Specifically, how do we make the visible and tangible some of the complex relationships within and among organisms and across scales? And it's why I think it's important to directly engage the public with these ideas. So let's start with what I mean by scale. Perhaps no one more eloquently describes scale in nature than Jonathan Swift in his On Poetry, a Rhapsody, which goes a little like this. The vermin only tease and pinch, their foes superior by an inch. So naturalists observe a flea has smaller fleas that on him prey, and these have smaller still to bite 'em, and so proceed ad infinitum. So while we might think of humans as individuals, they may more accurately be described as parts of a mesoscale system that resides at the intersection of microscopic, cellular, and macroscopic ecological systems. These systems constitute a set of complex interactions in which there's a constant exchange of chemicals, information, and energy. Cells, whether they're free-living, as in plankton, or in multicellular organisms, such as people, are in constant communication, and the community of other cells around them. This is, in fact, how human bodies manage to function, even though each cell has its own very complex set of internal interactions, such as an injury, as are responded to by cells as a group. So just like we as individuals are in conversation among each other and constantly adapting to whatever happens in the social and environmental conditions around us, our cells are doing it at the same time too. We then become part of bigger ecosystems. But how do we communicate these relationships to learners? While the mesoscale is basically what we're aware of on a daily basis, and the ways organisms interact at that scale can be detected and reasoned about through the senses, other scales are a little difficult to comprehend. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute website pictured here attempts to take this on through imagery, which can be effective to help visitors understand relative size. But while the human hair is a familiar item, many other things are not. The human hair pictured here in the middle is about 75 millionths of a meter across. So laid side by side, about 1,300 of them would span the palm of an average human hand, which is relatively easy to imagine. But the rotifers pictured in blue below are less than a millimeter, which would be barely visible to the naked eye. Compared to the hair, would take about 100 to span the width of the human palm, but people don't encounter rotifers on a daily basis, so it might be hard to imagine their size relative to the width of a hair. The macrophage on the upper right would take about 5,000 to span the width of a human hand. No doubt pretty abstract. This is where relative scale tends to break down. Another way of illustrating scale is zooming from one to another. This clip from the Charles and Ray Eames Powers of 10 zooms from a couple having a picnic in a park, something readily understandable in terms of scale, to the largest known at the time astronomic scale, then down to the smallest subatomic scale within the picnic goer's hand. The succession of scales can help conceptualize one scale with another. The narrator tries to explicate what is going on at each increment, but exponents are notoriously difficult to understand, and I'll run this clip.
At 10 to the minus 2, 1/100th of a meter, 1 centimeter, we approach the surface of the hand. In a few seconds, we'll be entering the skin, crossing layer after layer from the outermost dead cells into a tiny blood vessel within. Skin layers vanish in turn. An outer layer of cells, felty collagen. The capillary containing red blood cells and a roughly lymphocyte. We enter the white cell. Among its vital organelles, the porous wall of the cell nucleus appears. The nucleus within holds the heredity of the man in the coiled coils of DNA. As we close in, we come to the double helix itself, a molecule like a long twisted ladder whose rungs of paired bases spell out twice, in an alphabet of 4 letters, the words of the powerful genetic message. At 10...
So, using a variety of learning modes, a museum setting can engage visitors in comparing scales, not just physically, but functionally. One attempt to do this was at the New York Hall of Science in a set of exhibits that were co-located in the same gallery that look at that takes the visitor from the subatomic scale through the molecular scale and into the organism scale. So the realm of the atom was about the quantum realm, from electronic probability clouds to the behavior of photons and how they relate to light energy. Marvelous molecules was to acquaint the visitors with the important role that atomic and molecular structures and bonds have in ways that organisms self-create. From the molecules responsible to genetic traits and contraction of muscles to the number of molecules in the human body. Finally, Hidden Kingdom, which explored the world of microbes, from protists to experiences that demonstrate the size of viruses, bacteria, and amoeba compared to familiar objects like the eye of a needle. But scale itself, while important to understanding how the biological world is put together, is only one dimension. Living things from cells to cities act in ways that are communicated, coordinated, and cooperative. They are coherent systems that function as wholes. How does coordination happen at the microscopic level, resulting in things like multicellular organisms? How do groups of people coordinate their actions to result in cities? Fundamentally, many of these interactions are elicited by oscillators, which are powerful mechanisms that coordinate and regulate the action of living things internally through mechanisms like circadian protein interactions, nerve impulses, and circulatory mechanisms, and externally through environmental cues driven by light, temperature, gravity, motion, chemicals, and magnetism, and the sensations that they stimulate. These rhythms, in the form of feedback loops, provide stability and growth that allow oscillator-driven systems, when perturbed, to regain their dynamic equilibrium. The real power in these natural oscillators is synchronization. On the left is the healing of an injury at the cellular level. Cells must work in concert to replicate and reform the structure of the state prior to the injury, or for some creatures to even regenerate limbs. These processes are driven by our main circadian clocks and connected oscillators within cellular and molecular regimes in organisms to trigger signals to rally the healing process. The center image illustrates how slime mold and bacterial colonies respond when threatened with overpopulation. Cell populations use dynamic quorum sensing to coordinate their activities. Synchronization in these systems occurs when the population grows. The signal concentrates among the cells, reaches a critical threshold, and then the cells collectively switch to a synchronized state, then decide whether to leave and start a new colony or to stay. In flocking, schooling, and herding behaviors, primarily visual cues are used to allow coherence of an aggregate of individuals to coordinate their action, as shown in this murmuration on the right. But for some, chemical messages are also involved. In humans, as in other mesoscale organisms, group behaviors are coordinated through a variety of senses, hormones, circadian oscillators, and celestial cues to synchronize. These oscillators are fundamental drivers for biology, but can synchronize in a variety of ways, and could do so locally or across distances through different kinds of patterns. An experiment conducted by Matt Matheny and his group at Caltech involved a ring of 8 collected oscillators. They discovered that not only can systems sync over great distances, but they can also assume many different patterns. Here are some simple cartoons showing the ways synchronization happens. In the splay state on the left, each oscillator's phase differs by a set amount from its neighbors. There are implications here for how distant, out-of-phase neural connections in the brain are made. In the traveling wave state in the middle, only arrows opposite each other on the ring stay in phase. This phenomenon is pervasive in nature in the form of beating cilia, which couple to one another through hydrodynamic interactions that drive cellular locomotion. And in case you thought cilia were only in cavorting beasties, as Leeuwenhoek would put it, they're abundant and vital to all living creatures for sensing and internal functions. The state on the right exemplifies a noise-driven chimera. 2 sets of arrows are always synced across the ring, while arrows in between jump in and out of sync with their neighbors, seemingly at random. We see this phenomenon at work in unishemispheric sleep in some mammals and birds, and the onset of epileptic seizures. These are just a few examples, but there are many others in environmental and biological oscillators throughout nature. But how else can we represent these to learners? One way is through the moving image. Here's a short clip from a documentary providing some clues to how synchronization happens in biology with tree crickets and how it led to foundational ideas of the science of connected systems or networks using a familiar organism.
On a warm summer evening, thousands of them will all start chirping in unison. If we could capture some of these crickets, could we predict from an individual's behavior how an enormous population of hundreds or thousands of crickets would behave as a group?
Testing individual crickets would never work. The answer seemed to lie elsewhere, in their interaction as a group.
You have hundreds of these crickets, and they're all sort of interacting with each other in some kind of complicated way. And the question that came up in my mind over and over again was who is listening to whom?
And so that got him thinking more generally about patterns of connections, about networks. And it was around that time that something his father said came into his mind. Do you know that you're only 6 handshakes from any person on Earth?
And I started to think maybe it's true that this 6 degrees of separation phenomenon applies in the real world. And what are the consequences, if that's true, for the synchronization of crickets, for the way that disease spreads throughout a human population?
On a warm...
So whether people, plants, cells, or microbes, they exist in a coordinated dynamic system because they're connected. The connections emerge from oscillator-driven systems because of the relationships among all types of entities, and synchronization provides strong evidence of these networks of interconnectedness. Interconnected systems or networks are everywhere, but how do we make the invisible threads that connect everything apparent to audiences? One way is through diagrams, which can be striking and even beautiful, but while they readily convey complexity, there's little nuance that can be communicated about how they work. To overcome this barrier, we can use embodied activities to which visitors can interact with networks of various kinds. and even in this case, immersive kinds of experiences that could be at a larger scale, in which visitors can make connections as groups, explore the coupling of human and natural systems more interactively, and immersive systems like this can provide groups of learners opportunities to directly embody complex dynamic influences that affect equilibrium among biomes in large-scale systems. And finally, engaging the public in citizen science can help participants make meaningful connections. Who Eats Whom uses a naturalist platform, an online social network, to observe and share biodiversity information. Importantly, the connection among species in food webs. Through this brief introduction, I hope I have given you a glimpse of some of the ways that we try to help audiences make sense of fundamental but abstract ideas in biology. And while it's evident that we have a lot more to do, the tools are helping create more affordances that can make a difference in bringing these complex ideas to life for learners. Thanks, and that's it.
Thanks, Stephen. That was great. That was interesting to hear about the crickets, and the synchronization was an interesting new idea for me. So I thought maybe we will take just a few minutes here to wrap up, to talk maybe over some joint questions. And then Katy, I don't know if you have some parting words that you'd like to say at the end to kind of wrap up this whole 24 hours. I wanted to give you a little bit of time to do that as well, given that it's the end of this event as well. I heard a lot of different things from each of you about ways or methodologies for engaging public audiences. I heard, the pulling in emotions. I heard some new approaches to thinking about how to interact with ChatGPT, how to understand it from Kim. Heard some interesting things about how to look at synchronization and how to share that with public audiences from Stephen. I'm wondering, and this could be any of you, if you have particular challenges where you've really needed to stretch and think really, really hard about how to represent something visually. For example, scale is one that Stephen talked about. How can you share this concept with people in a way that's understandable? And so having to really think through how to visualize that. Are there examples that you can think of in your work where you really needed to stretch like that and think about a new way to visualize something?
I can start. That's basically, you've encapsulated my entire career. So probably most recently, I think one of the last slides I showed was something called Connected Worlds, which we're continuing to do research in, even though none of us work at the Hall of Science anymore. We discovered that the pathway into people thinking about complexity was cartoons. So we took, using machine learning, we actually extracted what we called fugues, which are motifs from people's behaviors in the exhibit, to make them into these cartoons where very simple representations of what they actually saw in the exhibit. And then we put them on iPads and line them up. They were mixed up, and said, okay, so come up with a goal of what you want to, what do you want to achieve? And it could be anything from, oh, I want all my plants to survive, or I want them all to die, or I want to have more birds, or whatever their goal was to achieve in a particular biome. And they rearranged these cartoons, and they were little GIFs, so they just kept cycling in a way that they could connect one to the other to achieve their goal. And what we realized, and these were family groups, friends, that kind of thing, adults and kids, they start talking about complexity using the terms of complexity, like feedback loops and tipping points and things like that, something that we had been trying desperately for, over a decade to get the public to understand. And we had turned to facilitation because we realized that part of the difficulty was connecting people, helping them to attend to things that they just weren't used to culturally. And surprisingly, the simplest way was the best way to connect them with complexity.
That's great. Katy or Kim, do either of you have thoughts about situations where you really had to think differently about visualizing a topic in order to make it understandable?
I'm happy to jump in so that Katy can have the final words. So yeah, I mean, it's happening like not on a daily basis anymore because nowadays I also have quite a lot of like organizational tasks. But every time I'm dealing with data or like the data sets that I like and that I like to work with, they are often that multifaceted and that elaborate, that it's always the case that you have to decide like what do you do with this and how do you represent this and what is it actually that you put in the foreground, what is it that you want to highlight, and in what ways do you shape what becomes visible. So I think this is always the case, and I think it's just what I try to say with my presentation is I think that we have a big legacy at hand, or that there's a lot of power in our hand by shaping those images and making those narratives. There is a fantastic article when Stephen was talking from Peter Gallison, who is a science historian. He's a physicist, and he has this article called "Images Scatter into Data, Data Gathers into Images." I love it. I can share it in the chat. I'm reading it every year with my students. They don't really like the article because it's a bit complex. But I think it's a fantastic piece where he goes through the history of science and explains how scientists are always used images to make something clear, but then abandoned images because they're not capable of representing the entire thing, and how this like back and forth is always part of sciences. And to me, the South African artist William Kentridge placed it very nicely by saying we never really represent the world. We always represent how we make sense of the world. So, and we can see that in the powers of 10, how most probably the powers of 10 of today, I mean, there are lots of like riffs on this. I think it's from the 70s.
60s.
60s, yeah, even 60s.
can
So
tell.
nowadays, yeah, exactly. And nowadays, most probably some of those layers would have changed, and the way we make sense of these different systems have evolved. So, and like looking back, I love to look at like maps from the 1500s, how they placed like dragons in the corner, and the oceans are filled with like sea monsters. And so every time we're always telling ourselves a narrative. So, and this is something I became more and more interested in. What are the things that I'm doing that I'm not aware of that shape how we look at the world? And I think networks, artificial intelligence, all these things are very contemporary topics that shape our understanding of where we live and who we are right now. And that will be very different in 50 or 100 years. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's as we think about the larger theme of this event and envisioning intelligences and how we communicate with each other and also potentially with other types of intelligence. I think the ways that we communicate and the ways that we understand others are we need to expand those so that we can recognize intelligence in other ways, and whether that's hormonal cues, or whether that's sound, or whether that's touch, or what it is, we don't know until we engage, and it's part of that two-way communication that's really exciting, and where the sort of, for me, where the excitement of those interactions and that learning and that exploring is. So, Katy, I don't know if you have any final words that you would like to share before we wrap up for the day.
Yeah, I like the answers. So yes, to wrap up, I would love to thank all the speakers. They made time in their busy lives over a weekend, close to Christmas, also to come in and to help us understand what we know and what we don't know. Sometimes it's more important to know what we don't yet know, because then we can try to find out together. From what I see, I think it becomes crystal clear that we have evolved to sense and act locally, to oftentimes act based on emotions, maybe not so much based on what we know. And we have to take that into account when we design new interfaces or data visualizations. Initially, this was all fine because we were also just acting locally and having a local and short-term impact. Now, as humanity, we have very much a global and long-term impact. So it's not okay any longer to just perceive and understand locally and short-term. We absolutely must find ways to pool our resources, to then take the data we have or create data that we need to analyze it and guide our collective decision making. And we are not alone. There are many other sentient beings on this planet that are suffering because of us, or that will live happy, healthy lives because of us. We are really the stewards of spaceship Earth. And so I think it's really important that we bring in other types of intelligences so that we can succeed together. We learned how important fungi are and how important other plants and animals are for us, and microbes, of course, and that we absolutely need to understand better what kind of intelligence they have, how we can better use this intelligence, and how we can combine across these intelligences. And in order to do this well, we, I think, can use data visualizations to envision existing intelligences here on Earth and maybe at some point also outside of Earth. And these kind of visualizations we would love to see in the exhibit going forward. So I will put the call for submissions one more time into the chat. Please do consider submissions over the next 9 years. So we just had year number 1. There are 9 more years to go. So if you don't yet have a project, maybe you have one in 2 years or in 5 years, please do keep the exhibit in mind. We would love to show the best examples of how we interact with other intelligences. So ideally not just us and ourselves, even though that's already complicated as a visualization challenge, or us and artificial intelligence, of course, also super valuable and needed. But I think there are many other intelligences, fungi, trees, microbiomes, that I would love to see more visualizations of. So please do let us know if you work on those. We can maybe also help connect you to resources. And so thank you for showing what visualizations already exist. It was super exciting. I got many, many links that I will have to follow up on, and more books that will have to come into this house, even though it's already filled with books. But I'm looking forward to that. And before I let you all go, I would love to thank everybody who made this all possible. So there are a number of people that are critical for all of this. Tracy Smith and Meryl Jacob did a lot of the project management and the technical support for this event. We had Yuhi Kher, Yash Kumar, Meryl Jacob, and Rishi Mukutka to be the tech support throughout all the 24 hours. Not easy, across time zones from around the world, pitching in and providing technical support. And of course, the website was done by Melanie Goldstone, and the beautiful music you got to hear was by Monica Herzig and her team. And all of those are also acknowledged on the website. And again, funding is provided by the CNS and the SAIS IT team at IU. So please do have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Plan to have another 24-hour event next year. And feel free to come back for the human physiome, so what we know about the function of the human body across temporal and spatial scales. So this is the ambition for next year, 2026. I wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas and a wonderful start into 2026. And thanks again, and please do come back next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Katy. Thanks, Kim and Lisel and everyone else. Rishi, it's been fabulous.
Thank you for having me. Have a good holidays. Wonderful seeing you.
Bye.
You. Bye.